For every employee, they're in charge of safety and security. We want folks to think on their feet, make good intuitive decisions, know when to change the ratios of confrontation, get help from their boss or their coworkers, or even call the sheriff. So safety and security is not something you have to think about in a kind of an obsessive way, but it's something to think about throughout your day. We sometimes think about the myth of no past problems, which was yesterday was boring, nothing happened here. That means today is going to be boring as well. In my experience, and you know from seeing things around the country and around the world, yesterday being boring is no predictor of the future today. So security and safety, kind of an ongoing thing. We need to be vigilant as we work throughout the day. My background in law enforcement really drove me to this issue and in security for organizations. My specialty area is in city and county government. Writing the book I wrote, Ticking Bombs on Workplace Violence back in 1994 was the jumping off point for me in this subject. But if you look around the country, issues like Columbine and Virginia Tech and some of the other national incidents have really helped me understand this subject in a way which I can communicate to people in a training environment. I have a doctoral degree in business administration, a master's in security management. I have a BS in psychology and a BA in English. And so a lot of my work is in human resources and security. Those things all come together as part of my educational experience. In county government, depending on where you work, you may come across a number of people that are difficult to deal with as part of your efforts to provide good customer service. It could be teenagers, it could be little kids, it could be the elderly or disabled, it could be people who do not speak English as their first language, it could be gang members that you come across as part of your work in the field, it could be people that are under the influence of drugs or alcohol, specifically stimulant drug users. It could also be people that are vandals or thieves, people that simply disregard our policies or our rules and come inside the facility to trespass or steal. So a number of these people in their environment come in and they're not necessarily a customer or a taxpayer. They may be in some situations, but oftentimes they can be very challenging for the employees to deal with. For people that speak other languages than English, it can be very challenging for employees who don't speak that language to connect with them or communicate. We have a tendency to shout at those people or to add IE or O or S onto everything and try to get them to understand what we're talking about. It can be very useful to think in terms of solving their problem. How do I find a translator? Could be another coworker, could be a family member for that person that's standing by. Maybe call the sheriff's department and see if there's somebody in the phone room that speaks whatever language that you're looking for. So finding somebody that can connect with this person and make that kind of language connection can go a long way towards helping them feel like we're providing good service and lower the emotional temperature as well. The golden rule says treat people the way you'd like to be treated, or do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's useful, but I think we need to take it one step further. The platinum rule says treat people the way they want to be treated. So ask good questions, engage with a person, try to find what issue they're trying to solve. So sometimes you say, what would I do in this situation? Just flip it around and say, what does this person need? How do we solve this person's problem their way? The golden rule tends to be one perspective. The platinum rule says, let's look at it from both perspectives, yours and the other person. If you look at the work that you do in the office, you have a kind of a structured environment which there's a little more security emphasis. For those employees that have to go out in the field, they go to taxpayers' homes, we may have a perfectly legitimate reason to be there. Easement, work that we have to do on the property, you could be there to give them some information or to provide some support for some situation. But the home environment for the taxpayer is a lot different for them than it is for you. When you go to people's houses, sit in the car for a second, take a look at the environment, make sure that it seems safe to get out of your vehicle and go inside, ask for permission to come onto the property. These are all things that you can do to make it a little bit easier in terms of the interaction. But one thing to pay attention to, especially in the field, no matter where you go, somebody's house or just going from your location to somebody's house, are dogs. So we don't always talk about dogs as a threat assessment issue, but it is an important thing for field employees to pay attention to. Many people who work in the field have significant stories about encounters with dogs where they didn't go well. Read the warning signs of what you see in the yard. Read the warning signs about a dog's behavior. If you need to get some help, come back at another time. Consider bringing over your colleagues from animal control or even talking to the sheriff. It's not always necessary to do your job versus do your job safely. So if you have to do your job and getting bit by a dog is part of doing your job, then you weren't doing it safely. So my idea for this is to really think about what I need to do in the field when dealing with taxpayers on their property or even dogs on their property. Sometimes when you're dealing with angry or irate or even threatening people, their tone really goes up. And what I like to talk about is modeling. If you can model the kind of approach that you want the other person to have, don't say calm down, don't say quiet down, just drop your voice. I talk about using the assertive whisper, which is really bringing your tone down to a point where the person has to actually listen to what you're saying, and what we're trying to do there is get them to model the same behavior. We know this from our study in psychology that if we can model certain behaviors for other people, sometimes they tend to do what we do. It doesn't always work, but it's a better strategy than trying to match them shout for shout. I always try to think about the assertive whisper as kind of the tones that would you use at your doctor's office or another professional environment. We can use those same tones here and really try to create the environment that we want people to comply with. Really, three things to think about for a safe workplace. One is self-protection. You have the right to protect yourself. That doesn't mean putting hands on for somebody necessarily, but you have the right to disengage. You have the right to stop providing services to an angry or threatening person, especially out in the field, especially over the counter. Self-protection is really a lot of things. You have the right to defend yourself, but we really want you to make good decisions, disengage as necessary, and get help. The second is managing your stress and your anger. Many times taxpayers, customers, vendors, people we provide services to can be very frustrated, they can be very entitled, they can be very angry, and sometimes they take it out on you. It's important not to take that personally. It's not aimed at you specifically. Oftentimes it's just about the situation, but they're angry at you and they take it out on you. It's not useful to take these people home inside your head every night. So if you can really think about how you provide good service and also distance yourself from that's important. Managing your stress and anger in these situations is critical. Not buying into their anger and matching them shout for shout just doesn't work, and it's not professional, and you know that already. Managing your stress is really about breathing. Under stress, we tend to breathe short and shallow. It raises our pulse rate, it raises our blood pressure, it gives us tunnel vision and tunnel hearing. Under stress, successful people can manage their emotions by breathing. Slowing down your breathing as slowly and as deeply as possible. Just practice it when you're doing your work or driving home. In those types of situations, it makes you think more clearly, it helps you focus on the situation and keeps you safe. And the last one is really working smart. Changing the ratios of confrontation, bringing in other people, coworker, boss, even the sheriff's department as necessary, or disengaging. And working smart is making good choices, enforcing boundaries, and being assertive with taxpayers or people that we do business with when they're in that kind of angry or threatening mode. Sometimes in the customer service experience, it's easy to get personally wrapped up or involved in the situation. My colleagues in this field talk about Q-tip, quit taking it personally. It's easy to say and sometimes hard to do, but when you bring these folks home inside your head, when you ruminate over what happened throughout the day, they can ruin your day with their rudeness or their abrupt approach to you. Being a good customer service professional says that you tolerate a certain amount of rudeness with people, but you set boundaries. But I think it's useful not to take these folks home inside your head and say, I did my best, I tried to explain or help or support what this person's issue was. I tried to get them to go away relatively satisfied that I did my best as a customer service professional. But I think sometimes you can ruin your evening carrying these folks around, so don't take it personally. I think for some men that come too close to women and violate their space, they either do it unintentionally because they're caught up in the issue, or they do it intentionally because they have bad social intelligence. They're just being rude. I think women have the right and the duty to buy back the space that they need and to get a little space and distance and to really take control of that situation, so they're a little bit more assertive and they feel more comfortable about the conversation. So it can be very difficult to have a conversation with some man that's shouting at her. Using space and distance and proxemic barriers is very effective in feeling a little bit more control. Over the telephone, and it may be possible that you have an irate taxpayer, screams and yells, curses at you. I think this kind of varies from person to person, as employees have some more patience than others. If you feel like you have reached the end point, you have the right to set boundaries. We ask all employees over the telephone to set boundaries for taxpayers as to what they'll tolerate. Some people have more tolerance for others than this type of situation, but really, if somebody curses at you, you give them one warning. If they continue the behavior, you hang up on them. After the warning, if they've continued the behavior, then you can say in your documentation, I gave the person a warning, they continue the cursing behavior, here's specifically what they said. Because if they come back later to complain, you can support yourself as a professional service employee by saying, I gave them a warning, I enforced the boundaries, I documented the conversation. That can make it easier for your supervisor or somebody else to have a conversation with that taxpayer and say that stuff's not allowed here. One thing that does not work for human communication is the phrase calm down. We see it all the time. We tell people to calm down. It just makes things worse. In your own experience, if you've been upset and someone said it to you, it doesn't make you feel very calm. So I always ask employees to choose another alternative phrase besides that. Calm down doesn't work. When dealing with angry people, we know it's important to let them vent. When they vent, sometimes we take notes, we nod or say, I understand, I can see your point, I'm sorry that happened. Those are validating statements. But think about in customer service, sometimes that you align better with certain taxpayers or visitors than your colleague does. It's useful, I believe, in customer service situations to be able to trade off. Alignment means sometimes you connect better with somebody than your colleague does, or vice versa. If they seem to get along better with you, then handle the situation. Allow your colleague to go on. If it seems clear that they don't connect with you but would connect better with your colleague, then let them handle it. This kind of flexibility can be very useful in customer service situations where the taxpayer is very angry and you don't know why. Sometimes it's just an alignment issue. The second thing we can do is to really focus on how we talk to strangers that we come across in the buildings. If you see somebody who's not in an area where they're supposed to be, they're a taxpayer who's clearly in an employees only area, or they're in another part of the building where they shouldn't be, we can simply walk up, introduce ourselves, try to get this person's name, explain what's going on in terms of why you came over. The reason I came over is I saw you looked like you're lost or you're in an employees only area, and then ask is the last part for their compliance. Sir, could I ask you to come out to this other area here? Could I ask you to step outside with me, or could I ask you to wait in the lobby? So if you can introduce yourself, if you can explain why you came over, and if you can ask for their compliance, if those things work, then you've handled the situation well. If those things don't work, then you have some choices. Bring your boss over, bring a coworker over to maybe say the same thing, or even think about calling the sheriff for those people that are trespassers or they're trying to get involved in some kind of criminal activity. One of the challenges we face in public buildings and in county buildings where we have lobbies and where people can come in to do business is sometimes people come in that are just disconnected with reality, or they just don't understand boundaries. So there may be homeless people with shopping carts. It could be kids with bicycles and skateboards. It could be people that are mentally ill based on cognitive issues or older age or something like that, where they just don't understand the environment that they're in. And so if we can come over to them and ask them to comply, ask them to follow our policies, escort them out of the facility, or ask them to comply with whatever they're doing that we don't want them to do, that tends to be a good first step. If that doesn't work, then certainly you can think about changing the ratios of confrontation and bringing over other people to support what you're trying to do. One approach to dealing with people who seem kind of stubborn and may not want to comply is to simply say to them, you can't do that if you want to stay here. And so it's somebody coming in with all their belongings and they're bringing in a bunch of bags of stuff, or some kid's trying to come in with a skateboard or a bicycle, or somebody's trying to come in and cause a disturbance. Simply saying to them, you can't do that if you want to stay here, it gives them kind of a face-saving way out. They have a choice to make about whether they continue in that current environment or they leave. And many times people hate being told what to do, and you can't do that if you want to stay here is a reasonable way for them to make a face-saving decision to go outside the building. If you think about how you do your work, when you're around strangers or around taxpayers in the field, I always talk about staying in condition yellow. Condition yellow says preparedness, being aware, being ready to protect yourself as necessary. Condition red says fight back or get out of there, get out of the situation. And condition white says it's neutral, I can eat my sandwich, enjoy my colleagues, take a break, but when I'm around strangers, especially I'm in the field, pay attention, that's condition yellow. Sometimes employees can get kind of on autopilot. They don't think about their transactions or the people they're dealing with because they do so many of them throughout the day. Everybody you talk to, either over the counter or in the field, has the potential to be perfectly fine or the potential to be difficult or even threatening or dangerous. When you think about contacting people in the field or contacting people over the counter, staying in condition yellow says I pay attention to my safety, I pay attention to these people and their behavior, and I take steps as necessary to protect myself and my colleagues. Most of the time the transactions, the conversations go perfectly fine. But for that small number, staying in condition yellow really has that kind of awareness that you need to stay safe. Intuition's a powerful driver for safety and security. Everybody has it. When you think about your own life and you've went against your intuition, it's usually wrong. If your intuition says, should I get my boss, go get your boss. If your intuition says, should I disengage, disengage. If your intuition says, call the sheriff, then call the sheriff. You don't need permission as an employee for this organization to do those things. We'll back you as long as what you're doing is reasonable and appropriate for the situation to keep yourself safe. In the United States, we have focused on 4 categories of potential workplace violence perpetrator. Category 1, the biggest category, 60% of the perpetrators, tends to be criminals, crooks, people that want to come in and rob the facility. That's quite rare here and not something that would happen in this environment typically. Category 2 is people we provide services to, customers, students, passengers, patients, taxpayers. A lot of our work in workplace violence prevention for city and county government is around this second category. Category 2, people we provide services to, is about 30%. 5% of the perpetrators in the United States tend to be current employees or former employees. Now, this gets a lot of coverage in the news media, but it's actually quite rare. These cases are catastrophic and hugely horrific, but they're also quite rare. And then the fourth category, which is equally troubling but also quite rare, is domestic violence involving an employee. We have the right to get involved in your personal life when it comes to domestic violence if it affects the workplace. I always encourage employees, if you have a domestic violence situation or a restraining order, to talk to your boss, to talk to human resources, to talk to the sheriff so we can come up with a safety plan for you. In most organizations, if you're not selling things that have like a cash-only business at nighttime where it's a retail environment, very rare that you'd have this Category 1 perpetrator. For most of the things that you do in your work, Category 2, taxpayers, customers, people we provide services to, not all their behavior is violent. It's usually threatening, and it's oftentimes verbally threatening. So if you look at the category of the most concern for us in this environment for county employees, it's typically Category 2. That's why we're talking about these tools for good social interaction, good customer service skills, changing the ratios of confrontation, being able to bring over people up to and including the sheriff as necessary to deal with those high-risk people. And the good news is they're not always very common. The bad news is if they come in, sometimes their behavior can be very problematic. That's why I want to give you the tools to work on some of these things collectively. One of the problematic populations we may deal with are the homeless. Not all homeless people are dangerous, but some of them can be very problematic because of their drug and alcohol use and their mental health history. When dealing with homeless people, make sure you give enough space and distance. Make careful eye contact, not too close, not too far away. Treat them as human beings, but be careful not to get caught up in their situations. Dealing with the homeless can be most of the time very safe, but if not, you need to call the sheriff. One of the issues we see with workplace violence prevention is the idea that we should not focus on profiles, whether this person fits a profile, but really about behaviors. As an employee for this organization, you should pay attention to those types of behaviors that a reasonable person like yourself would find troubling. One is an employee or a coworker that has a real injustice sort of a mindset. They're an injustice collector. They see that the world is trying to ruin their life or ruin their job. The second big warning sign for me is somebody who is bullied and as a result feels threatened by somebody in the organization and may want to have a kind of a revenge perspective. The third thing is oftentimes substance abuse. People that have drug and alcohol issues have a tendency towards violence as one of their solutions. Another factor is where an employee uses stories or language or talks about workplace violence or school incidents that have happened over a national level where they think that's a good thing. Most people know that that is not an empathic, sympathetic response to these situations. It's very troubling to hear these types of responses from an employee. So when we talk about stakeholders, people you can speak to if you hear these types of things, your boss, your boss's boss, department director, even the sheriff's department, safety officer, risk management, these will all be people that you could talk to about things like this. So when we hear these types of troubling types of comments from an employee, oftentimes they're not direct threats that the employee makes, they're indirect threats or third-party threats. Sometimes an employee will want to harm somebody, but they won't tell the target, they'll tell somebody else. If you hear that type of conversation, if you overhear that or that's directed towards you, these are troubling conversations from another employee. You want to talk to the stakeholders in this county as to what you heard and what they think it means. Research from the FBI and the U.S. Marshal Service and the Secret Service has really identified two categories of people who make threats. Some people make threats, and we call those people howlers. In government, these are people that say, I pay your salary, you haven't heard the last of me yet, I'm going to get you, you better look out. And then there's another whole group of people we call hunters, and these people do not draw attention to themselves. They work in stealth, they work typically kind of behind the scenes, they don't make direct threats to the target. These people can be quite dangerous in their behavior. Howlers howl, and the good news is in government, many of the people we deal with are howlers. They're in your face, they're aggressive, assertive, over the counter to a degree where they're trying to make you feel frightened or concerned for your safety. There's another whole group of folks who are troubling, which is the hunter behavior. The good news is most people we deal with are howlers. The bad news is the hunters are the ones that do damage. But the good news about the hunters is their numbers are small and they engage in this third-party leakage. They tell other people. A parallel you might think about is in the school. If some student wants to shoot the football coach or the football player or the cheerleader, he does not tell those targets, he tells his friends. The challenge for us in schools is to get those kids to tell us so we can intervene in those situations, and we have done that successfully. In the workplace, it's the same. If you hear comments, language, behavior, a reasonable person like yourself would believe are these third-party threats, you've got to tell one of the stakeholders for the county so we can intervene. In any situation where you feel like you have to call the sheriff, it's useful to use a code word like Mr. Green or Dr. Green to tell a coworker to go to a safe place and carefully and quickly dial 911 if it's on a facility phone, or dial the sheriff's dispatcher number on your cell phone to get the sheriff en route. In those situations where somebody's threatening or dangerous or may have a weapon, if we threaten them by calling the sheriff, sometimes they leave or they assault somebody. It's not what we want. We want the sheriff to come in and catch them doing the things that the sheriff needs to see. So the next sound they hear is the sheriff coming up behind them. So Mr. Green or Dr. Green, because the sheriff wears green pants, is a good code word for people to remember. You can use any code word that the rest of your team or your department can identify with, but Mr. Green or Dr. Green tends to be a memorable one. So that means go to a safe place, dial the dispatcher, explain the situation and the behaviors that you're seeing and why you need the sheriff's help right away. In the rare event that you may have to call 911 to get the sheriff en route, it's important to tell the sheriff's dispatcher behaviors, not labels. So tell the sheriff's dispatcher specifically what you're seeing, who's doing it, give a good description, be a professional witness, describe the situation and the person involved with it to the degree that they can send out the information to the deputies as they respond. When the deputies get there, they're going to have kind of tunnel vision. They're going to be focused on talking to the person that may be the threatening individual, and they're going to separate that person from the conversation and take him or her outside, or have a pretty spirited conversation inside the lobby. In the field, you want to provide as much information as possible so that if the person walks away or drives away, the sheriff can find them. But in those descriptions, it's very valuable to give as much information as you can so the sheriff can come in and do their work, which is to identify and detain and even contain these people so that they don't harm the sheriff or you. So it's very important to give very specific information, be a professional witness. In those situations, the sheriff is going to come in and do their job and take care of their safety first and your safety after that. You want to give them all the opportunity in terms of the information to do that carefully. Every employee faces personal and professional stressors in their job. Some things happen on the job, some things happen off the job. One of the benefits of being a county employee is you have access to an EAP, which stands for Employee Assistance Program. It's a counseling service which is not related to the county. It's an off-site program which you have access to as a county employee. One of the things that EAP covers is the professional stressors that you may face with colleagues or your boss or taxpayers. You could talk to a counselor about that. But probably the biggest benefit is off-the-job issues. Divorce, bankruptcy, legal issues, financial issues, blended families, cancer, Alzheimer's, all those things are covered by EAP. One of the reasons why people don't use EAP is they don't know about it. That's why this environment and this conversation can be something that you can file away to remember that we have an employee assistance program. The other part is that some people don't believe it is confidential, and it is confidential. There's never any report shared with your employer. No one in your employer even knows that you use the service. I've used it myself personally. I think EAP is valuable for my relationships. I think it's an important part of continued good mental health for all employees for any of the stressors that they face in their life. The other part about Employee Assistance Program is that not only is it confidential, but there shouldn't be that stigma that people feel about coming to an EAP provider and asking for help. One of the strengths of good mental health is asking for help before it affects your life or your career in a way that you can't fix. Employee Assistance Program, very valuable resource for all employees. When you look at the work that you do in government, it's very important. The work you do in government provides safe streets and safe community, safe parks. Businesses can come and flourish here. People can raise their families and enjoy the schools and enjoy the neighborhood that they live in and enjoy this facility. When we talk about the work that you do, I always use the metaphor of being a shepherd. It has nothing to do with the Bible. It's not religious. It has to do with taking care of people. Shepherds take care of their community, and I've been doing that my entire adult life. When I think about the work that shepherds do in city and county government and in government agencies around the country, they're there to support and defend and protect the citizens. That's what we pay taxes for. If you're a shepherd, you take care of yourself first, then you take care of your coworkers second, then you take care of the taxpayers third. That's the way it works. Take care of your personal safety first, take care of the coworkers second, the people that you work with that you care about and care about you, then take care of the taxpayer. You know that your safety is your responsibility, but you also should know that we have other people in this organization, the stakeholders, including the sheriff, they're also very committed to your safety as well. Have these conversations with your colleagues, with your boss, in staff meetings, whenever there's a safety or security concern. Your vigilance is what we really appreciate. Shepherds take care of themselves first, their coworkers second, and the taxpayer third. Thanks for being a shepherd.